Hello and welcome. My name is Nigel May and I am the host of the podcast A Gay Old Time, a podcast where I get to interview queer celebrities about their life journey so far, about the highs and the lows and the things that have happened in their life to get them to where they are today. The episode of A Gay Old Time that you're about to watch is a very special episode indeed, because my guest is a man who I believe is one of the most recognisable faces in the world of show business. He is an actor from shows such as Doctor Who, Torchwood, Desperate Housewives, a TV presenter, a star of the theatre stage. He's literally been in every show you care to mention, and a man that has always been very keen to represent with his queerness as well. But a man that has disappeared from our TV screens over the last few years because of allegations that have been made against him. In a rather fabulous interview where no stone is left unturned, it's my pleasure to say welcome to A Gay Old Time, Mr. John Barrowman.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. I am going to say, here we are, season 5. I have been after you as a guest since season 1 because, John Barrowman, you and I are of a similar age. And I'm going to say right now, I think when it comes to people that I have admired from the queer community on TV, on stage, on screen, that have always been their authentic self, then you are top of the list, young man, quite frankly, because you've always been authentic, haven't you?
Well, I think I've been authentic. I know that in the very beginning stages, obviously you being the same age, around the same age, I think you're younger than me.
I'm not, well, just slightly by months, I think. I'm 56.
I'm 58.
Well, I look older than you, so back at you on that front, mister.
So for me, I've always tried to be myself, but as you know, when we were younger, you couldn't really be yourself in certain situations for fear of certain things. So, like losing your job or, getting your ass kicked by a group of people. So you kind of protected yourself in that way. But I generally have always tried to be, and this is where I think being my authentic self, whether it's about being out and it's being loud and it's being proud, all that kind of stuff, which now is a definite given. It's more so the sense of I wanted to be kind. I wanted to be generous. I wanted to spread joy, and I wanted to make other people happy. And that, to me, before I came out, was my authentic self. And then I came out and things like that. Well, the decision to come out to, because I was never really not out amongst friends, if that makes sense. I mean, I was private, but I never really discussed, sexuality and stuff like that amongst friends. But when it was time to come out publicly, I came out publicly, and then I was able to add that onto what I always believed was my authentic self. So I kind of jumped around there. But yeah, that's what I see as being your authentic self for me.
I'm quite happy to jump around with this podcast because I've got to say, if we did your entire life chronologically, we would be here for about 3.5 weeks on this podcast because you have done so much. But I do always at the beginning of the podcast, I want to step inside the gay old time machine. I know we'll talk about a certain other time machine later in the podcast, but the gay old... That's the one. But the gay old time machine is taking us back to Glasgow in the late 60s, where you were born, 1967, Glasgow. What were you like as a child, John Barrowman? Tell me about little John.
Oh, I was outgoing. I was fun. I was kind of like, I'd say myself, I was a bundle of joy. But if you asked my parents, my mom would probably say there was times I was a nightmare because I wouldn't sleep. When I was put to bed, I would stay up, or the doctor actually told my mom and dad. In those days, they didn't know what hyperactivity or ADHD or anything like that was. And my mother was, giving us juices and things, which were just adding to it. So I would be, the doctor said, leave him, let him play, let him, do creative things at night if he doesn't want to sleep. And so that's what she did. From the moment I was in a crib up until I was like, we moved to the States when I was 8 or 9 years old, she let me kind of just stay up, do my thing. And perhaps that was a bad thing, but I look at it as being a good thing because I vividly remember as a little boy, before I was on the playground and all that kind of stuff, I vividly remember things like playing with my action men and creating these scenes with them, along with my sister Cindy dolls. And, creating these little stories with them and doing stuff. So the creative side of me was always there from when I was very early on. I was probably a little bit too big for my boots at times. I remember in Mount Vernon, things like, I remember shoving a friend into a vat of cement because he ticked me off. And I remember, as in Glasgow, they would say, I got a leathering for that when I went home, because there was the kid standing covered in the cement that they were building the new primary school across the street from us. And I got home and my mother was waiting for me with the friend who's covered in cement. And my mother proceeded to pull my pants down in front of everybody and spank my arse. And then I was sent right to bed. So I think I was a great kid in Glasgow. And, some people might say different, but who knows? There's certain memories that I have of growing up there that are just really joyful and fun. I remember my school, Mount Vernon Primary School, where, like I was saying, where they were building the new one across the street from our house. Our house was 13 Dornford Avenue. I remember it. My dad built that house. I went to the other school before the new primary school was built, which was an old Victorian brownstone building. And I remember that, again, these pop in my head. I remember going to my gran. I used to go back home, and when my mom wasn't home, if she was at the record store, she worked at a record store in Shettleston, and I used to have to get from the school to the record store. And in order to do that, in those days, you had to take the bus. So I would get on the bus, and everybody in those days knew each other. So I would get on the bus. The conductor, who knew my mom, my gran, all the different people in the area, I'd get on the bus, and I would then go the bus route to get from Mount Vernon to Shettleston. And I would then go see my gran at the dry cleaners that she worked at. She would give me 10p for a 10p Lucky Bag, which I would go to the store, but she'd also ask me to go buy her a packet of Benson and Hedges, 20 with it, to get her a little coupon that she got that she saved in the booklet. And I, being 4 or 5, would go into the newsagents. They would sell me the cigarettes. I'd get the Lucky Bag because they knew it wasn't for me. It was for my gran, because they knew, as they called her, Murn. So I'd then go drop off the cigarettes, have my Lucky Bag, and then I would head to the record store where my mother worked with, I called her Aunt Isabel, and it was Isabel Eusebi. They had a hair cutting salon and for men, women, and the record store next door. And my mother worked in the record store. And my job when I was there, I was put on top of the counter when people would come in, and my mother would get me to sing whatever would be the top 3 or top 5 songs if they wanted to hear what the songs were. And I would stand and sing those songs for the customers. And it just became kind of like a novelty for it to come in and see, as I was called then, Wee John singing on the counter of the record shop. And that's one of my kind of vivid, fondest memories. And also the kind of, for me, my first introduction into what would be kind of performing for me. Because it wasn't until, and then after that, I would get asked when my parents would throw these fabulous kind of early 70s parties at their house. They built a big, huge party room at the back of the house. We called it the extension. I used to get asked to come down, and I would be upstairs. And when the party was going on, God knows what my parents were doing, but they had fabulous parties. And I would then be asked to come down, and my mother would give me a double-headed shot measurer, which I used as my microphone. And I would come down in my kilt or an outfit, and I would then sing either Millie Molly Mandy or Long Haired Lover from Liverpool or Beautiful City from Godspell. And I would sing, that would be my party piece. And then when I was done, everyone would applaud, and back I would go up to bed. And that was it. That was my thing. And that, I remember doing that a lot, even to the point, my Aunt Dorothy, who is no longer with us, she was one of my biggest fans when I was a little kid. And she used to always say to me, "Oh, John, one day you're going to be famous. I can tell, like, you're going to be famous." When she used to call on the phone from her estate agent's office, she would call on the phone, and all the girls in the office would get around, because I would answer the phone like this. 77890, who's speaking, please? And that was the phone number. I still remember it. And I would answer the phone like that. And then she would get me to sing down the phone to the girls at the office over the phone. So that's how I remember my very early childhood. I don't remember, of course I probably was a troublemaker. I remember watching Opportunity Knocks on television, which a lot of your audience probably will never remember.
I do. Huey Green. We loved Huey Green back in the day.
I wanted to be Lena Zavaroni.
Didn't we all, quite frankly? I mean, she was fabulous, wasn't she?
He's making eyes at me. I so wanted to be Lena Zavaroni.
Surely you can do a modern dance remix of that, John Barrowman. Come on one of your tours, do a dance remix of that. It's got to be done.
That's not a bad idea. It's jumping around. Funny, later on in my career, I became friendly with Bonnie Langford, who knew Lena. And I never got to meet Lena Zavaroni because, well, when my career was starting, she was a little bit out of my reach at that time. But then, unfortunately, she passed away. But a lot of times when I mention it, her family or people that know her get in touch with me to say, it's lovely to hear you talking about Lena. Because she was a fantastic performer, fantastic singer as a young girl. And that's how I used to look at her. And I used to play Opportunity Knocks in the playground at Mount Vernon Primary School. And I used to line everybody up, but I was always Lena Zavaroni.
I'm not surprised. I'm loving everything about this story already. And for me, it doesn't surprise me that you sort of zone in on people like Lena Zavaroni, because I think, you are, even though you are still going strong with all of your fabulous talent, you are like an old school entertainer. You were born for that spotlight on the stage. And it seems like that performer in you was definitely there at an early age. Now, obviously, here we are on A Gay Old Time. So I've got to ask you, was there any feelings of otherness at an early age as well?
Well, otherness is an interesting word, and I've never used it before. So thank you for the introduction.
Welcome.
Because our generation, we would have, and I don't mean this in a negative way, because words are different and words are what you make of them, and you give the word the power. And when I would say different, as I would have described myself when I was younger, it wasn't in a bad way. It wasn't in a bad way. I just always felt that I was not like everybody else in the way that I kind of approached things or did things. But it was more so when we moved to the States that I realized that. And that was because when I got to the States, I've said, I'm just going to talk about anything. And as it comes out, and if people don't like it, you don't like it. You don't have to listen. You can fast forward. I remember one of the first instances and this is a physical difference that I didn't know about. When we moved to America in 1976, the second time, I went to school to we would call primary school. It was grade school. And I remember I was being bullied for my Scottish accent at that time. And I was in the class, my teachers, Miss Frost and Miss Luker, were the teachers who kind of, in a way, took me under their wing to kind of, in a way, protect the new boy who had come from a long way away. They'd never met anybody Scottish. And I remember going to the bathroom in the school and two boys next to me, and I was peeing like everybody else. And one of them took a look at me and they went, "Barrowman doesn't have a head." And I was like, "What?" I had no clue what they were talking about. And I was like, what do you mean? And they went out to the playground and told everybody, and it was because I'm not circumcised. And everybody in America at that time was circumcised. So that was my first thing. That's a physical difference. But I always knew there was something inside of me that was unlike the others, because later on, as I became friends with someone who I'm still friendly with today, her name's Laura Mickey, and she and I became best pals, almost like a brother and sister. And Laura was the one who then taught me how to speak with an American accent. And Laura, Mike Molina, Ross Von Hoff, I'm still friendly with, and I've been in touch with Mike before, years ago. We became kind of like, we all hung out together in the neighborhood that we lived in. And I knew Mike loved basketball. He was into swimming. He was into all the sports. And I would play basketball with Mike. I would swim with Mike. We would dive together. We'd ride our bikes together. But also, I would then go to Ross's house and I would read comic books. I would play with the action figures of the superheroes. That's where my nerdy side came from. So Mike introduced me to the sports. Ross introduced me to my kind of nerd side. But yet I'd go over to Laura's while Mike would be playing basketball sometimes at Laura's house in the driveway. And I would help her feather her hair to look like Farrah Fawcett. And I would help her play Barbies and style the Barbie dolls' hairs, and also play with the Cher doll and everything, while we were on the grass and Mike and Ross they'd be playing basketball. So I knew that they didn't like to do that, but I liked to do it. But they never, my close-knit friends growing up at that age, in particular, Laura, she said years later, she said, we never looked at you as being any different from anybody. You were just John. And we accepted that you like to do those things that were different to other people. And we never hassled you. Yet other kids at school would hassle me for it. They would bully me for it. I was the first male in the grade school to play the flute. No boys played the flute. You always played a trumpet. You played the
trombone.
Trombone. Yeah, I've tromboned in my life, but never played one. You played you played a brass instrument, or you played another woodwind, but you would never play the flute. So I got bullied for that. So there was lots of things, but I kind of went like this with all the bullying. So that's when I kind of realized I realized about my otherness. Is that right? Is that
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was when I probably first realized it was, my physical otherness, but also my emotional and who I was inside but I didn't know what the word was. I didn't know about the word gay. I knew from when I was a kid of hearing poofter and all sorts of other things from growing up in the UK, and fag from in the US, but I never kind of put those words to me because I didn't know really what they meant. So I was just me.
So when you were getting the bullying from people for doing things that were deemed to be sissy or girly or whatever, it's great that you just brushed it off. But did you sort of hold on to any kind of like internal upset, or did you think to yourself, I don't want to go to school because these people are bullying me. I don't want to be in front of them. Or was it like a total defiance?
I never was afraid. I never was afraid to go to school. And it was, I think, a total defiance because I had fun. And I knew that, to even the point, I knew that when I went to school, I was on student council. Not only was I in the marching band, I was the drum major. And that was because, again, playing the flute and piccolo, I was the tallest boy. So when I got in the line of the with the drum line and the flute and piccolo line, it would have been girl, boy, because I was tall for my age. And I looked a little older for my age. So the band director gave me the position. He said, do you want to be drum major? And I was like, yes, because being drum major allowed me to have control and power over all the boys and girls that made fun of me, because they would have to respect me because I was the drum major and they'd have to follow my lead, even at that young age. So that was it's things like that. I didn't fear. I knew also when I was in gym class, the girls wanted to tumble with me. I was a gymnast. So we'd put out the tumble mats. And my dad always told me when I was younger, he always said, be good at what you're doing and then nobody can deny you. And that has always stuck with me, to be good at what you're doing, because then nobody can deny you. They can make fun of you. They can do all that. But I think I like that word they used. I was defiant. I didn't let it affect me because I knew that for those minor little moments of being bullied at the locker, right, there were hours of fun and joy that would be somewhere else. Going to swim, I took swimming lessons because I didn't know how to swim. And when we first moved to the States, we had a swimming pool in the neighborhood, and the apartment building before my parents bought their house, we lived in. All the kids in the summer would go down and swim. The first summer I was there, and I would stand in the balcony because I couldn't swim. I didn't know how to swim, and I'd watch all the kids that I was going to school with from that apartment block going to swim in the pool. And this might give you kind of my mindset. And I'm standing on the balcony. My mother told me this story. She said, you woke up one morning and it was like summer vacation in June, and all the kids were down at the pool. And she said, you went out to the balcony and you looked out the balcony. Your dad had gone to work. My gran and the dog were in the apartment. We were like on the top floor. It was a corporate apartment we were in. And I looked down at the pool, and she said, you just turned around and you went into your bedroom. You put on your swimming trunks. In those days, it would have been a nice little Speedo with an American flag on it. And she said, you marched down the hall. You got down the stairs. You walked down. She said, I followed you from far behind because I didn't know what you were going to do. And she said, you walked down through the garden of the apartment block. You walked up through the gate of the pool. You walked to the pool and you threw yourself in, and you forced yourself to doggy paddle because she said it was like there was no way and I remember to a certain extent, there was no way I was wanting them to have fun without me being there having fun with them. And she said, you just threw yourself in, and she said, she was like, Jesus Christ, what she didn't want to run and panic anybody, because she said, but she watched me ready to jump in if I needed help. She said, but your head bobbed up and you started doggy paddling and you got yourself to the side. And she said, from that moment on, you never got out of the pool for the rest of the summer.
I think this is brilliant. I mean, FYI, first off, I've got to say, I don't believe your Speedo days are over for a second, John Barrowman. But secondly, the impression I'm getting here of a young John is definitely somebody that didn't want to say no to anything. It was like if somebody said they couldn't do something or they felt they couldn't do something, they were determined to succeed. So I'm feeling that maybe, I mean, when you look at your career and, you know, all of the things that you have done, it's like you've done such a varied tapestry of things. So there may have been times when you thought, oh, I can't do certain things, but that defiance and that want to succeed was definitely there at an early age.
Yes, it was. And it also, I think, was there because I grew up with very strong women around me. And women who didn't allow themselves, they were kind of ahead of their time. Both my grands, my dad's mother and my mom's mom, they were both women ahead of their time who kind of took situations into their control because they weren't going to let things happen to their family and just sit by and let other things happen. Does that make sense?
It does.
And my mom was the same. And my sister grew up to be like that also. So I had all these kind of, and my dad was a very successful businessman. So all of these things around us, around me, were all influential. And, you know, like my dad's mom, my Grand Emily, she ran a pool hall. She ran a pool hall that was given to her from her family. And one of her, if I'm correct in saying, one of her brothers, I think it was her brother who gambled, lost all the money, and she then had to pick up the pieces to make the pool hall work. And she also then she was feeding her family along with, you know, because both my grandfathers worked for the council. So they were, you know, they struggled. They were salt of the earth, working people. And that's the kind of backbone that we came from. So there was never an aspect of, and also if you go forward in the career, I've never sat back and let other people decide for me what I'm going to do. I've always made those decisions. However, if I've wanted to do something, I've gone and made it happen. So that pool story, you're absolutely right. It started from a very young age. And I wish I could tell you where I got it from, but I try to figure it out every so often by talking about the people around me. And that's basically what it is. I would think if I had to decide, it would be the people around me that instilled it in me.
Well, you obviously dived into success at an early age. Can we talk about diving into your teenage years? Because obviously those feelings of otherness, and we don't have that vocabulary to know what it is at an early age, when puberty kicks in and the hormones kick in, then all of a sudden we kind of realize maybe that we like people like us, people of the same sex, people of the same gender. Did you date girls? What happened for you with the whole puberty and dating experience? Was it girls all the way, or was it kind of like, I'm not quite sure what's going on?
I knew that again, the otherness. I knew when I was 9 or 10, 8 or 9, 9, 10, because that's when kind of feelings, you know, started for me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand it, but I knew it was not like everybody else. When I went into my teenage years, I knew by then that inside I was probably gay. That was what it was. I didn't know what being gay was because I had nobody around me who I thought I knew was gay. So in high school, I knew there were kids who were flamboyant, and in high school, sorry, I take that back. I didn't know there were some gay kids in high school. They just weren't out. But I mean, I'm just going to be honest and blunt in those days, because I was, as you know, and as we describe in our generation, there are different kind of people in our community. There are different, is it right to say, can we say there are different levels of gay people?
Yeah, there are different facets to the gay. You know, if gayness is a diamond, there are different facets to that diamond. Let's put it that way.
There's different facets in the spectrum, and some are a little more out than others and flamboyant than others, and some are a little more withdrawn and, you know, that kind of thing. So yes, I would say I knew that some people, but I never acted upon anything like that. I hated dating girls. I hated the dating scene. I love women. I love women, and I adore being around my female friends and going out with them and laughing and getting pissed with them and having a great time. But I don't want to have sex with them, right? I don't want to do that. I'm a gold star.
Well done. I'm very impressed.
I'm a gold star. And I've done things with girls, but I've never done the deed because I have never wanted to. When I was in high school, I went to all the dances. When I started as a freshman in high school, even girls who were juniors and seniors, and I'm not saying this to stroke my own ego, trust me, but all the older girls wanted to date me because I looked older, and I was a pretty handsome kid when I was in high school, and they wanted to go out with this new kid who'd come in. So it was very uncommon for a freshman and a sophomore to go to the junior or senior proms. But I went to both of them as a freshman, sophomore. I did all that. I went to the dances. I went out with girls. I would go out on dates with girls. I had the girlfriends, but when I'd go out at the weekend with a group of friends, I just dreaded when I had my car. When I was 16, I hated the fact of having to take them home because I knew that taking them home, I would either have to make out, stresses me out thinking about it. I'd have to make out with them in the car, or I'd have to make out with them on the front doorstep. I would have to attempt to seem that I was going to go to first or second base because they would talk to their girlfriends and they would be like, he didn't do anything with me. I remember there was a park I used to stop at. Oh my God. I won't mention the girls' names because I don't want to get them in any kind of freaked out stuff. But I would go to this park and there was a slide that you would go down and we'd go in the slide and it was covered and then we would make out in the slide. And I just remember it was almost like trauma to me to do that. And then I'd be so quick I've got to go home now. I disliked it. I did not like doing it. So I didn't have really I did that stuff, but I didn't do anything. I don't know what other people thought about me. And again, I really didn't care.
Well, that's the beautiful thing, isn't it? You were so taking me back as well, because I used to call it sexpectations. It was like, you think, oh no, tonight they're going to expect me to do this and they're going to expect me to do that. But the peer pressure as well. I mean, I dated girls, John, and I'll be honest, it's like I snuck off behind their back to do things with guys, which I'm not proud of, but it's just that worked for me at the time, and that's what I did. But there was peer pressure from people around me because I never told people I was gay for a long, long time. I think everybody knew, but I never said. So obviously when at school people are going like, oh, did you get to first base? Did you do this? Did you do that? There is an element of peer pressure. I kind of lied a few times and said, yeah, it went further than it did. Did you ever do that? Or were you always kind of like, no, were you honest? And did you feel peer pressure?
I didn't feel peer pressure to talk about it. That was the other thing. I didn't feel peer pressure to talk about it. I just did it and then kind of didn't think about it. And I didn't talk about it at school the next day because, to be honest with you, I didn't hang out with the boys that talked about it. I was part of the kind of very early on, part of the what we'd call the speech group, the drama group. I was involved in choir. I was good at, like I said, I was good at sports. And when we have gym period, I was always, I'd be a captain of a team or doing something because I want to relate it to a little bit like Glee, the TV show. I hung out with all the cheerleaders. They were in the swing choir and in choir. They were in our show choir. I was in the show choir. I was involved in the musicals. The girls from the pom-pom squad and the cheerleaders were involved in musicals, and they became friends with me. So it kind of became the thing that I knew them, and the guys from the football team or the basketball team or the wrestling team didn't kind of bully me then because I knew the girls that they all wanted to kind of date, if that makes sense.
It does perfectly. I think you're lucky because you went to school. Obviously, there was mixed genders. It's like I went to an all boys school, so I had no chance to escape. Basically, go and play with the girls. I've been thinking about this kind of stuff since I knew I was going to do this. But there was one guy that I did have a crush on. That was my next question. What was the first crush?
Yeah, well, I would have to say there was. The first crush, there's two crushes. I go back to when I was in band. One was a guy named Billy Chester when I was back in grade school. And Billy played the clarinet. And in those days, I hung out with his sister, Amy Chester. But I hung out with Amy. I loved being with Amy, and she was my girlfriend. But I really just wanted to be with her brother. And the more I could be around her was the more I was around her brother. And that was kind of that was one of the first crushes that I thought, this is weird. I kind of feel like I like him, but I don't know why I like him. I just like being around him. And the irony is, I mentioned my friend Ross Von Hoff, who was the guy I would go for the comic books and the super. Ross and I are still really good friends, and I know his wife, Billy, and we all hang out together. Ross is also friends with Billy Chester. And Billy now Billy's out and is married to his husband. And it's kind of a funny thing that we all know about it, and we all have talked about it before. Anyway, I digress. In high school, the person I kind of had the crush on, and didn't go to my high school. He went to the Catholic high, which was an all-boys school. But he used to come over to our school when we were doing musicals because he would help with some of the choreography. He was a really great dancer, and he still is a great dancer. When I mention his name, I think you'll know who he is, but those people who know musicals and Broadway and West End will know who he is. He used to come and he would sit when I was doing the first musical. I think it was a Hello Dolly that I was doing, and I was tumbling in it. And he's also a gymnast tumbler. So he would help me with my tumbling. And I kind of got a crush on him. His name was Michael Barres.
Yes, absolutely. I do know that name.
And Michael, for those who know in the West End, and he did Kiss Me Kate in the West End in London. And he's done many Broadway shows. Now, we're going back to he's here, all right? So he was in high school. He's a year or two older than me. And he was in high school, and at the Catholic high, he would come over to our high school, Joliet West. We would all hang out together. And I feel awful about this. This is something I thought about, and I thought about it the other night. I thought about it last night when I woke up at 3:00 in the morning. I thought, I have to tell this story because it's something I feel awful about, and I've never spoken about it. I was hanging out with the girls. We were doing some work thing for the musical, getting it ready. And I remember he asked me if I wanted to go see a movie. And I was a bit nervous and taken aback because he was so handsome and he was built and he was just gorge, right? And I said, yeah, let's go to the movies. And I dumb me, not thinking, thought it was talking about everybody. And I realized he's not talking about everybody. He just wants to take me to the movies. Now, I don't know if Michael was out at that time, but I got the sense that he liked boys. I also, our gaydar at that, you sense, you just know.
You do.
So, yeah, let's go out. And I remember going home that night and I was getting ready he was coming to pick me up because at that point I couldn't drive. And he pulled up into the driveway and he had it was like a big old Chevy American 70s car, but it was in the 80s. And he drove it up, and I remember I saw him out of my bedroom window. I looked out and saw the car pulling up. I was extremely nervous. And I didn't know what to do because it was just him. And I thought, oh my God, this is him. I don't know what went through my head, what I thought. All I can tell you is what happened. He rang the doorbell. I screamed, I'll get it. Told my mom I think I was going out and stuff. I went down to the door. I opened the door. And I said something to the extent, something's come up, I can't come. I'm not able to go out, blah, 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 blah. I just chickened out and I got scared shitless. And I could see kind of like the deflation in his face. And I often wonder what would have happened if I had gone on that date and then, been kissed by a boy that early and not said anything to anybody. What his trajectory would have been at that point. But I've never told that story, and I'm sure if he listens to this, he might not even remember it. But I felt so bad because also I was a bit devastated myself that I didn't have the guts to do it and go. I was, again, maybe too worried about the peer pressure of what everybody would think at the high school.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I was going to ask you. I mean, it sounds like you were a very happy young person, and we never know what will have happened with that first kiss. But I've got to ask you, did you ever struggle with your sexuality then? I mean, it sounds like you didn't go on that date because you thought, I'm worried about what other people will think. I mean, it sounds like you've come from a very, very, understanding, accepting family. So were you worried about what your folks would say? Would you worry about what people around you would say?
Well, I'd never, like I said, I'd never met anybody who was like me. The only representation I ever saw of how I felt that I was keeping quiet about was a Billy Crystal on soap. And that was the only representation that I thought, that's not me. That's not like me. And if I can go so far to talk, I won't mention their names, but because again, I don't know what their situation is now. And I don't want to be the one to out anybody that might be of a generation that doesn't want to come out. But I got a feeling that certain teachers that I had, they were gay, or they were, I knew felt more about the guys than I did about the teachers that might have been lesbians or bisexual. But so I could see what different people were like, but I didn't have any connection myself to feel that that's like me. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And I wasn't traumatized by it. I wasn't worried about my sexuality. I didn't really have any struggles because, again, even in high school, although I didn't go on that date probably because I was worried about what people would think, but I just then got on with it. There was no place for me to go. It was the Midwest. It was a town, it was Joliet, Illinois. The only people that I knew that might have been like me went away to school and college and university. And that was the kind of thought process that I had was, when I leave here, that's possibly when I can then open up and really be who I am. But at home, I mean, I never felt like I couldn't be. I was the same. I was John at home. I would dress up and be stupid. And Halloween was a great excuse to put on a frock and go out with mates and be silly in the neighborhood. Again, in the and with the people that I knew, I never changed who I was. I was always involved in theater. I was always involved in community theater. I was always involved with music. I was always involved in the arts. So even at that age, unless you're under a rock and stupid, pretty much 80% of the boys that are involved in that, I wasn't there to get the girls. I was there to be fabulous and play roles. So yeah, I don't think I did struggle. And I know some people probably are like, oh, fuck off you. That's da-da-da. I really didn't. I knew who I was, but I knew I wasn't ready to blossom yet.
It's so nice to hear, though, because so many people that I speak to on the podcast do struggle with their sexuality during those, those formulative years of our journey into queerness. So when you were in Illinois, then there was no kind of like coming out or anything like that to the family or anything like that. I'm going to assume that obviously came much later on.
Much later. I'm going to paraphrase here because there's so much. But I went off to University of Iowa to go to school and to study performing arts. They wanted me to be an opera singer. I didn't want to do it, so I only went there for a semester. However, in that semester, I was part of a show choir where I got along with a lot of people. And all these people, they were like, we're going to go audition for this place called Opryland, USA, which is a musical theme park in Nashville, Tennessee. And I thought, I'll go. So it's in Chicago, the audition. I brought all of them back. They stayed at my house. And my mother, I remember my mother saying to me, they were all the other kids, they were, college kids. They were all rehearsing and in the basement in different rooms in the house, doing their thing, rehearsing, doing their stuff. And my mom came up to me and she said, you're going to this thing with them, aren't you? The audition. And I said, yeah. And she said, are you going to practice? I said, I've already done it. I already know what I'm going to do. And she said, okay. So she got worried at that point that I wasn't going to kind of be able to do it. And I was going to, not do well. This group of people, I was not allowed to do certain things in the group because I was a freshman and it was only the higher classmen who got to do the singing parts and the roles and all this, that, and the next thing. In high school, I was ranked like between first and third in the state for music and all that kind of stuff in different categories. I'm paraphrasing again. We went to the audition and we were at the audition and there was probably about eight of us who all went, and we were doing the audition for Opryland. And I remember they all did their bits and they all got thank you. And then I got up and did my bit. And I think I sang, I got music, I got rhythm, I got my gal who could ask for anything more. And I stood and I threw a standing back flip and I went, I got daisies in green pastures. And they went, stop. And I remember the woman came over, Miss Jean was her name, Jean Whitaker. She walked up to me and she went, you can tumble? And I went, yes, ma'am, I can tumble. And she said, you're a good singer. And I went, thank you very much. She said, can you wait? I said, well, I've got all these people they've come with me, and I need to take them back because we're all in the same, we got a van, and I drove the van, and I got to take them back. She said, well, they're going to have to wait because you just got a job, young man. And I was like, what? And they were all like, what? There was like animosity a little bit, because here I was, and but again, I knew I had to do something to go for them to bite. Everybody else was getting up and just singing a lovely song and doing all this. And I thought, I'm going to get up, I'm going to sing, I'm going to throw a backflip, and I'm going to, just move as I would move. And I did it, and I got that gig. So that was going to Opryland was the first time that I then was able to be myself. And because I was amongst other people from all over the country who came to this particular place. And if I can be so blunt as saying, that was where my first kiss happened. And I had a boyfriend and a bit of a relationship. That was where I came out, in a sense, to my work colleagues there. And I had a great time. I remember it was in the pool at our apartment building and where we all were living. And I was on my back, I was floating in the pool, and I was floating up to the one side of the pool, and Michael Clowers, he was in the pool with me, and I was on my back, and I got to the steps that were going up, and my head bumped on the step, and then he leaned in and he kissed me, and I thought, this is it. And that was it. And I was like, my God, now I know.
That sounds so romantic. I'm there with you at that moment. That sounds glorious. It gave me goosebumps.
It was one of the most, and I wrote about it in my book, and and Michael later got in touch with me because I used to then go, I was in the show called I Hear America Singing Its Song, and Michael was, funny, his name was Michael. Michael was in the show, oh gosh, I can't remember. Was it Music? It was one of the other shows. And anyway, I used to, when I was done we'd do 4 or 5 shows a day outside in the roaring heat. And then when I was done, or between ours, I would go over and watch his. And I'd sit and watch him because I wasn't as good of a dancer as a dancer. I was a mover. And I'd go watch, and later on, years later, when I wrote about it in my book, he contacted me, said, I didn't realize, because he had an impact with me. He was my first kind of, and again, we never had intercourse. We did everything but, right? Because we were also going through a period that was HIV and AIDS. And I did not know enough of what it was about. I was under again, this is so stupid. I was under the belief that even if you were just gay, you'd get it. It was like, because it was so instilled in us as a younger, that generation, that just being gay, you'd get it, right? So it was a weird time, but I did everything else that you can imagine. And Michael got in touch and he said, I didn't realize I had that kind of impact on you. But that kiss was the most, and I'm so glad it was a romantic moment for me. And it was under the stars. I write about it. I was floating under the stars, floating in the pool. It was humid. It was hot. The pool was lovely and cool. And he just leaned over top of me and kissed me.
If ever they make a film of your life, that scene is where the entire audience in the cinema go like, oh, that's lovely. That particular moment, just joyous. So there was definitely a confidence in your sexuality, John, wasn't there? I mean, once you found your tribe and you found a person to be with and you were surrounded by like-minded people, you seem to be very confident in your own skin.
I was. And then I went back to Illinois because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I knew that I went back to go try and, what I call pound the pavement, get an agent in Chicago and start to do stuff. I went to acting classes, but I also realized then that I needed to, it wasn't going to work like that. And I went to DePaul University then in the interim. Again, they wanted me to be an opera singer. I wanted to do musical theater. I hadn't found the right place yet. I'd had my experience at Opryland. I went back in the closet. I went back into the closet. And I'd had friends who'd come up from Opryland. Anyway, I went back the next year. Opryland called me again. I also was got employed by Disney. And Disney flew me down. I flew down to Disney to go see the show that they wanted me to be in. It was called the Whoop-De-Doo Review. And I went to go see it, and my mom went with me, and I saw the show, had a weekend, I think it was a weekend on Disney, and then I was probably 19, 20. I'm so bad with dates and times, so please don't quote me on those. But I was around that age, and I went to we went to Disney, came back from Disney, back in Illinois, still hadn't come out to my parents at that time. And I told my mom, she's like, well, you have a decision to make, because Opryland also called back and wanted me to do a show, their brand new show called Way Out West. And they wanted me to come down, see the show and see the role that I'd be doing, which was one of the main parts in the show. And I would be doing all the dancing and flipping off of tables, all sorts of stuff. So I then looked at that, and I had a decision to make. And I remember the phone call from the producer from Disney, and he called me up, and I had made my decision by this point. But I had to explain to him and at Opryland what the decision was. The guy from Disney called me, and I said, I've made a decision, and I'm going to have to decline Disney. And he said, why? I said, because I feel I have to be loyal to people. And the company that gave me my start, who I have asked me to come back and are offering me a bigger part and a good role. And I know there are competitors of yours for the summer season for the shows. I said, and you're a much bigger company, and maybe I'm making a mistake. I said, I have to be loyal to the people that I want to be loyal to. And that's why I want to go back to Opryland. And I have, I think, a better opportunity. I'm a bigger fish in a smaller pond there. Whereas at Disney, I'm going to be a small fish in a big pond. The irony, ready for this, Nigel? Michael Barrowman worked at Disney.
Oh my God.
At that time.
How weird is that?
How weird is that?
Yeah.
And I was at Opryland, took the guy, the producer from Disney, then said to me, he said, well, John, he said, I wish you all the best of luck. And he said, I'm going to say this to you. He said, but usually the people who turn us down end up doing bigger and better things. And also we end up seeing their name in lights. And he said, I'm sure we're going to see yours there. And so I left that, rather than them going, piss off, you've chosen them over us. He was gracious. And again, looking back, I learned from all those things, to be gracious, to be kind, to be all that kind of stuff. So I went off and did Opryland again, had a great time. I was messing around with a boy there at that time, but also I kind of fell for a girl, and her name was Marilyn, and she became a dear friend of mine. Again, I never did anything with her, but we were there kind of protecting each other. She introduced me to the school that she was going to be going to in Southern California called USIU, which was a performing arts school. And I then made the decision, and I told my mom and dad, I want to go to USIU. So I went out and I auditioned for USIU, did the same thing, sang a song. I did my own choreography, and I did a monologue for the acting teacher, Andy Barnacle. Gosh, what was it from? It started off with, the first line was, I always wonder why people don't like me. And it's about a boy at a boys' school talking about why people don't like him. And I remember that, and I did that monologue, and I was accepted, and I got a scholarship, and which was great. So I went that journey, Opryland, after high school, that kind of up and down of career and not knowing what I wanted to do. But that's really where I found my footing. But again, I didn't come out to anybody's school, but I was still me. There was also kind of maybe a fear that if I did come out, I wouldn't get the roles that I wanted, because immediately I would be pigeonholed. And I know a lot of people will be listening to that now and going, that doesn't make sense. But in the 90s, it made perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Because in the 80s and 90s, late 80s, early 90s, if I came out as gay, or, as now, if it was saying you came out as queer, you wouldn't get hired to play certain roles. And all of the roles that I played in the beginning of my career after, coming to London and getting my first job, I played all the straight roles. I never played a gay role until later in my career, after I was out. And we'll get to that.
We will indeed. So I want to go back to the man that said, people that turn us down, go on to do very fabulous things and have their names in lights. Tick, tick, John Barrowman, you did that. So you mentioned London. Obviously, I want to fast forward slightly to when I first came across you, really, as a performer. And that would be, probably...
Harriet's in London.
Well, yes, been there many a time. Oh, was that you? Now I know. I thought it was. I wasn't sure. I didn't like to say. I'll talk about Live and Kicking. It's like,
Yeah.
Saturday morning kids TV. And also, I remember you being in Hair. I worked as a journalist at that point in my life. And I came to, we did a shoot with you with lots of wigs and stuff with Hair. And it was fabulous. And I'll show you the picture that I got.
Arena, Pepsi, Lori DeMar.
Yes. Yes.
And they had that she had that big, huge afro, the wig that they put on her.
Yes.
Shorter hair. I remember that vividly.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I just thought, it's one of my favorite musicals. And that moment when everybody's naked on stage, we were all like, oh, look, and then the lights go off. It's so annoying, but brilliant to watch, it must be said. So, literally, let's talk about obviously hiding your sexuality. We all try and shoehorn ourselves into others' expectations through fear of losing something from our own authenticity in life. So, doing things like Live and Kicking, being on a kids' TV show. And, let's be honest, at that period as well, when it came to like presenters on the telly, you were pretty much everywhere, and rightly so, because you are a brilliant presenter. So what was going through your head at that point? Was it very much like, oh, I've got to do the straight thing, I've got to pretend, I'm not going to say anything? Or did you not try and lie about things, but just fudge everything a bit?
I didn't try to lie about things, I just fudged it a bit. That's a great way to put it. A finger of fudge is all you need, right?
To give your kids a treat, yeah.
Right. So I kind of fudged it a little bit. When I got involved with Live and Kicking, I again went out and did I heard that they were changing from going live to Live and Kicking. Philip Schofield and Sarah Green were leaving. They wanted new presenters. I went out with a friend and I did a what's hot and what's not around London. And I did my own videotape, in the old days carrying a big candy camera around. I didn't realize you needed permits to film in London. And I got kicked out of Hamleys because they were like, you can't film people and children without knowing. I had no clue. But anyway, I did this tape. I sent it off to the BBC. I got called in and I got teamed up with Andy Peters and Emma Forbes, and we did the test. It all worked out. I wasn't allowed to say anything. Now, when I was doing that, I honestly think that they really didn't know what to do with me, because I wasn't not being me. I was being me, but I was, like you said, I wasn't saying anything. I wasn't saying about my sexuality. I wasn't saying that I was, I was still doing musicals in the West End. And remember, in those days at the BBC, there was a culture that was a lot of men who were married to women, but those men were clearly gay. And they were running the stuff, or they were very powerful, strong single women who were running certain aspects of it. So there was a culture of kind of cover up, don't say anything. And I just slotted myself in with everybody else. But again, I knew people around me who were gay, but it got to a point where I was doing stuff and I really wanted to start getting, and I had friends in the theater world who knew me, who were, I had done shows prior to being involved in Live and Kicking. I was creating a name for myself in the West End. So people who knew me there knew that I liked guys, but the TV world didn't. So I wanted to have a friend in the TV world that I could trust, that I could talk to, that I could go out to dinner with them and a friend and my friend, whoever I wanted to be dating at that time or whatever I was doing. So I came out to Emma Forbes. I came out to Emma. I actually asked her if she wanted to go out to dinner one night. And Emma, she talks about this brilliantly. She was so excited because she's like, oh my God, John Barrowman, he's so gorgeous. And she was married to Graham, who she's still married to at the time. And Graham laughs at this all the time. She's like, John Barrowman, you invited me out. She said, I thought you were going to tell me you loved me and all this kind of stuff. And I was going to be flattered. And, you were going to be my new best friend and my crush and all this kind of stuff. And blah, 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 blah. And she said, you came up, she told me you were gay. And she was like, part of me was so honored that you told me, but part of me was so deflated. Because it wasn't what I expected. And so she was really the first person that in that world really that I told. And, because it was something you just didn't do. Again, because of the time, particularly in children's television, you could lose your job. But for crying out loud, practically everybody was on the spectrum.
Absolutely.
The queer spectrum there, and it was, but again, I had a great time. I remember I'd do two shows. Like, I think I was in Miss Saigon at the time. I'd do two shows of Saigon and, I'd get up at 5 a.m. in the morning. I'd get to the studio for Live and Kicking for the briefing I then do the briefing. We do the show live from 9 till I think it was 11:50 something. And then I would leave to go to the West End to do a matinee of Miss Saigon, and then obviously an evening show. But in between, this is so funny. I can't remember who's telling this. I used to go and I'd get out at Oxford Street. I'd have the car drop me at Oxford Street, and I would walk from Oxford Street to the theater, hoping to be recognized.
How fabulous. I don't blame you, quite frankly.
I'd walk and just look to see if people would recognize me. But it was something that I learned later, that in television, you don't get recognized in the first year, because it takes really a year for them to, because they're inviting you in their living room. It's usually the second year of a show or something that you start getting recognized by the public. But I would, because listen, and I'm just going to be blunt with you and honest, and I don't give a shit what people think about me saying this. I wanted to be famous, and I also wanted to be successful, but I also loved the fact of that idea of fame. Some people shy away from it and hide from it. I didn't. I was like, if it comes, I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to celebrate it. And I will have worked hard for it. So I wanted to be recognized. It's kind of a weird, well, it's not. It's me.
I don't think that's weird at all. I think that's absolutely normal to suddenly think I want to be recognised for my talent because, I enjoy doing what I do. I mean, you do your job incredibly well, all facets of it. But talking of recognition then, John, so obviously there you are on kids' TV, but also you are a big name in the theatre. I mean, every show from like Phantom, Sunset Boulevard, Saigon, La Cage, you name it, you've done it, quite frankly. Were you worried about being recognised in gay, in inverted commas, places? I mean, were you able to lead a gay life away from the spotlight of TV? Because TV world and theatre world, I mean, you touched on it there, are completely different. In the theatre world, it's been more readily accepted for a long, long time. In the TV world, certainly at that point, it was very much like, we don't need to know that. I mean, were you told not to be gay, as it were?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. I was, and it wasn't so much so again, having said, in that period, you just didn't, because you could lose your gig. And also you could be pigeonholed for not getting roles, because immediately there were certain people who, when they cast something, go, you can't cast him in that, he's gay, which is absolutely, I'm going to be blunt, sorry to swear, fucking ridiculous. And I have to jump a little bit here, because when I was doing in the theater and doing a bit of television, and still, I again, didn't pretend, I just didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about who I was publicly. However, what was funny when you mentioned about that photo shoot that you did with myself and Felice Arena and all the rest of them, we were all kind of playing and being silly in those days. I didn't have a fear of going to clubs, because I used to go, but it was a little later on I started going to clubs and doing things. I was super hyper focused on my career. Because I wanted to achieve certain things, and I had goals for myself before I was 30. I wanted to do certain things and achieve certain things before I was 30, and I'm happy to say I achieved them. However, I do look back and think, I could have done this, I could have gone this place, I could have gone that. I still went to clubs, but we went, in those days, again, nobody was talking about it. No one would say, oh my God. No one had cell phones. So if I went to Heaven, or if I went to Love Muscle, which was fabulous.
Absolutely. I can imagine you there in a heartbeat.
Well, I had a great old time. But so no one could take photographs. It was always hearsay and words. But you know what? Sticks and stones can break my bones. Names will never hurt me. Words won't hurt me. All that kind of stuff. So people would gabber and talk. When I'd go away on vacation, like when I'd go to Spain or I'd go somewhere, I would go to clubs. I would go to the clubs, if I went to Amsterdam, I'd go, I did this. I didn't do the saunas I joked with you earlier. I didn't do the saunas and stuff in London. I did them in other countries just because I could. And that's what I did. And that was a self-preservation and self-protection again. But when I had made the decision to come out publicly, it kind of happened almost by accident, really. And because I just started living my life really authentically. And that was after television. I will jump back on something, but that was in an interview that I was doing. And I talked about at that time, my boyfriend, who was now my husband of 31 years, we've been together. and it was Scott. And I remember the journalist saying to me, "You realize you've just come out of the closet?" And I went, "I have 2 perfectly groomed Cocker Spaniels. I live in a house in Chelsea. I'm in musical theater and I'm on television and I love song and dance. What other clues do you need?"
You don't need to be Miss Marple to work that one out, do you?
With a man. What other clues do you need? Why do I need to spell it out for you? So that was when that happened. Jumping back, there was a time I was doing a TV show in New York City where it was my first big American TV series called Central Park West. And I think about it now, if it had been at a different time, I could have sued the pants off them, because I was asked to go back. I was asked to go into Scott and I were just, our relationship was developing into what the future would hold. We were going to be together for the rest of our lives. So we were both really committed to it. I went off to do this TV show and Scott came over to visit. And I remember one of the guys in the show saying to me, who I got along really well with, who played my best friend in the show. And he said, "Just make sure you keep all that stuff kind of low key and da-da-da-da-da." He said, "You don't want people knowing about that." But I got called into the office of the producers of the show, and they sat me down and they basically said, "We'd rather see you come out of a club and be pissed or drunk or high or whatever and fall in the gutter with a supermodel. We want you to basically not talk about being gay, not talk about your boyfriend, not do this, not do that." And I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember the exact conversation, but it was to basically go back in the closet. And I was like, okay. And I took that meeting on and I went back to Scott and I told him, and he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, I can't go back in the closet. I said, I've spent so much time, understanding who I am, being comfortable with who I am, and again, spreading joy, spreading love, being positive, helping other people. And I said, for me to go back in now, it's going to be detrimental to it. I said, and also, what about you? How is that going to affect you and me? I'm going to have to hide you? No, I can't do that. So I didn't. I defied it and I didn't. I got written out of the show, which was the end of the season. However, the show never got picked up again. It got canceled. So fuck them. It was their karma.
The gay gods were speaking.
Yeah, but that was one of the situations where I was asked to go back in the closet.
That defiance that we talked about earlier at a young age.
Sorry, and the people who asked me to do it were gay themselves. That's a whole other thing. But I'm sorry to cut you off there, Nigel.
No worries.
One of the things that, and people might think I'm being a little pompous in saying this, but having had the career that I have had, and the trajectory that it's gone on, and the people that I've worked with, and the places that I have been, and the shows that I have been on, which I've been in on, if I can stroke my own ego here a little bit, some of the shows I've been on are the top 5 rated shows in television history. Okay? The most homophobic people during some of my career were gay people, gay men and lesbian women themselves who ran the industry.
And that is a whole big bucket of fucked up, isn't it, really? I mean, to have that come back at you is not good. But, finger snaps to you, John Barrowman, for the fact that you were like, no, it's like, I'm going to, put my husband, my boyfriend, Scott, at that time, you put him to the front. You made him your priority. And that is living your true, authentic life, quite frankly. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the things that you have done in your career. I mean, we could be here all day, but it's like, let's mention some shows. First off, is it true? I mean, this is sort of ironic given what we've just been talking about. Did you audition for Will and Grace as Will, but you were told you couldn't be Will because you were too straight?
I did. Now, this creates a bit of controversy, because there's no record of it. And I know some of the red tops, which are a whole nother thing in themselves. The red tops tried to make it out that I was lying and telling a fib. I am telling you what I was told by my agent at that time. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I auditioned for the show. I think I got down to the producer's call, which is the final before you go in for testing. Right. And I got to the producer's callbacks and I didn't get any further. And I asked my agent at that time, because they really sometimes don't give you a reason why you do or don't get a job. And he told me, they said that I was too straight for the role of Will. And it made me chuckle. What? And I thought, that's something for the record books. Now, that's nothing against the producers. It's nothing against the show, because the show's fucking amazing. I love the show myself. But and ironically, another show that I was on television, we were paired with each other on the network. So they were just on a different day. And I got to meet some of them on the side when we were doing what was the promotion for the network for the shows and stuff. But it's not something that I'm upset about or angry about. It's what it was. People, some of the papers try to make it out that, oh, that's made up. It's not made up. That's what I was told. And I can only tell you truthfully what I was told.
So it sounds factually correct to me. If your agent said it, then your agent had no reason to lie, really, did they? Sounds good to me. Let's talk about, obviously, I think the show that most people listening to this podcast of a certain age will be going like, oh, you've got to speak to him about Doctor Who. You've got to speak to him about Doctor Who. Let's be honest. I mean, my word, Captain Jack Harkness, the omnisexual time traveller. If ever there was a moment when the right person had the right character at the right time in the right program and had that right job, that was you, John Barrowman, as Captain Jack Harkness. What a role.
Yeah, it's a role that changed my life, and it was a role that I'm exceptionally proud of because of also the way it was written. Russell and Stephen Moffat, who wrote the first episode, that I was in. And when I'm really proud of it because, and I'm going to say this, that I was the first openly gay man on television playing an action hero in that time. And I was playing a character who we didn't have a name for yet because all the different words hadn't come into the queer world yet. So he was omnisexual is what we called him, because also it was a little easier for everybody to so no pun intended, to swallow. The brilliance of Captain Jack Harkness is not only that it changed my life, it changed the trajectory of how a lot of things were perceived on television, because he was written unapologetically and he was put onto a show that had never seen anything like that before in its history. And the writers who were involved, they get all the credit for it because they saw me, they saw my personality, and they tapped into it and started writing and putting it into Captain Jack, which to me is what I then used as a basis to make other characters that I played in television successful. Is on television, you have to put an element of yourself into the character in order for people to catch on to it. Yeah, Doctor Who was a massive, and that was one of the times, when I kissed the doctor on camera, all this big deal of the doctor kissing another man at the moment. Well, sorry, I did it first.
Well, this is what I was going to say, John, is because if ever I get Russell T Davies on this podcast, and he is on my list, he really is, it's like, maybe he'll tell me otherwise. But for me, I think that was when Doctor Who became, now it is such a beautiful queer juggernaut of entertainment. But back then, that was the first delicious slice of queerness that I think we had on Doctor Who. There may have been others that I've forgotten. But for me, when I look back, that was the first time, because it was like the first series when it came back after all the years of not being there, wasn't it? Yeah, so to have this omnisexual, good-looking bloke on the TV kissing the doctor and just being fabulous.
His first line, when you met Captain Jack Harkness, he's looking at Rose Tyler hanging from a barrage balloon, and he's standing next to his buddy, who's in the military with him. He looks up and he looks at Rose and he goes, "Nice bottom." And then he turns to the guy and he goes, "You've got a nice bottom too," smacks him on the arse and walks out. You right away knew exactly who this man was.
And we right away fell in love with him as well. I mean, I love the reviews for that, for your character. One person said it was celestial promiscuous, which I love. And then the other one, like Tom Cruise with suspenders. I assume they mean American suspenders, like braces, as opposed to, Frankenfurter type suspenders, minus the Scientology. I mean, those two reviews couldn't be more queer, fabulous, more, just beautiful at every turn. If they tried, could they?
No, and I have to tell you something. It's the first I've heard.
Seriously?
Yes, I don't tend to read the reviews. It's the first I've heard. I only knew when I gauged the success again on being recognized. And for me, it all changed when I literally walked out of the meeting and the audition, and I knew that I I couldn't tell anybody. I knew I got the role. Literally, they called me within 20 minutes. And I went in with Russell and Phil Collinson. And I remember wearing the leather pants that Captain Jack wore in the first episode. Well, sorry, one of the first episodes that he was on were my actual leather pants that I wore to my audition because I rode a bike. And I remember when I took my helmet off, Russell and Phil joked. They said, when you took your helmet off and you shook your hair out for the meeting, they were both like, he's got the job right away. He's got the job. And I remember sitting in my leather pants and I read the sequence that I was given. I read it as an American. I read it as a Brit. I read it as a Scot with my Scottish accent. And I did it all different ways for them. And I was going back to do Anything Goes in the West End at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. And I went back and I got off my bike. My niece was there and they called me and they said, "You're Captain Jack Harkness," my agent, at the time. And he said, "You're Captain Jack." And I was like, holy shit. That little boy who left Glasgow in 1976 and, grew up in Illinois, and watched Doctor Who on PBS, never knew that one day I would ever be part of that show that I loved as a kid.
The leather pants, obviously a great idea because, as you said in your first line, nice bottom, quite frankly. Obviously did you well, John. Obviously, you were loved on that show as a character, so much so that you were given your own show, Torchwood, as well. Jack Harkness was in your life for such a long time. I mean, still continues to be, but it's like for such a long time. I mean, Doctor Who, Torchwood. Were you genuinely surprised about how popular you were as a character?
Well, to let you just see, I mean, there you can see the TARDIS. You can see all my Captain Jack up where the dog's picture, all the Captain Jack action figures that are all up there. So, and I've got some props that might have disappeared from the show. And in the other room, I have a Dalek. So, and the Dalek that, one of the Daleks that was, I think, repainted, the one that shot me. But I didn't know that when I did the show, this is going to be the weird, I say the weird side of me, the kind of premonition side. When the first episode with Chris Eccleston and Billie Piper came out, I knew we were onto a hit. I was already cast. I was cast when they were cast, and I wasn't allowed to talk about it for the episode I was in, which was episode 9, my first episode. I knew we were onto a hit because when I was a little boy, my mom used to put me in her coat and to walk me past the storefronts on Sucky Hall Street in Glasgow because I didn't want to walk past storefront dummies, the Autons, because I thought they were going to try to kill us. The first episode with Chris and Billy was about the Autons.
Wow.
And I just got a feeling right there and then, my life is going to change. And the success of the character, at first they didn't know if he was going to be likable because he was a con man, and he had to, and in order for a character obviously to be likable again, it has to have a journey to change. We didn't realize, and again, I'm talking about just what I know and how I felt about how it was done, but I don't know the statistics. However, I knew that it was becoming popular because I started to get recognized in the street. I started to get recognized as Captain Jack. Everybody was like, oh my God, and when we got towards the end of the season, when I remember turning the page in the read through and it said, and Captain Jack is shot and he dies. I was devastated.
Not surprised.
I was devastated. And then I turned to the next page and it said he gasped and he came back to life. And I've just got chills again. And I was like, yes, because I knew I wasn't done. And the thing that they had also then after that they discussed with me was about my own show Torchwood. But however, I wasn't going to be coming back onto Doctor Who for the next season because the Doctor was changing and it was going to be this new guy called David Tennant. And they wanted to let David establish himself because Captain Jack had become so popular with those episodes that he was in and a strong character. They didn't want it to take away from David establishing his Doctor, right? Again, what I was discussed in a meeting in the room. So I was like, yeah, okay. However, but I knew Torchwood was to come. Actually, sorry, I might have got the date thing wrong there. Torchwood was after, I think, I was told a little later, because I remember my meeting, they told me about it. It was on the bombings in London.
The 7th of July bombings.
7th of July bombings, because I was doing a cabaret, and I remember all the shows were shut down that night, and I said to all the fans who were coming, I said, I want to run the show tonight, my cabaret. Please come. I will hold till everybody gets here. Find your way here. I had a full house. They all came. I remember my husband, Scott, he got on the motorcycle. Russell was there. Russell and then Julie Gardner. Scott went on the motorcycle because she couldn't get there from the BBC. He went to pick her up on the motorcycle. And I remember it was just a laugh. Julie Gardner getting off the back of a motorcycle in her skirt. She was straddling it with the skirt all hiked up, and he's got to give her a helmet, but we got her there because they wanted to tell me about Torchwood. And that was the night that I also found out about Torchwood. So it was a sad night, but also a night that I just was a different kind of joy that was there for me.
Absolutely, a pivotal night in your life. Mentioning some other shows that you've done, I mean, literally we could be here all day, but it's like, I mean, so many. I mean, you've hosted on This Morning. You were in Desperate Housewives, which was one of my favourite shows ever. Oh my gosh. If ever you deserved, I loved him. If ever you deserved icon status, it's not just for Doctor Who in my opinion, it's for Desperate Housewives as well. I mean, you've done the one, I love Desperate Housewives.
Desperate Housewives came about because Mark Cherry, who is the producer and the writer and the creator of Desperate Housewives, who also wrote on The Golden Girls, Mark Cherry was a big fan of Doctor Who and Torchwood. And he contacted me and he said, I want to write a part for you in Desperate Housewives because I love Doctor Who and Torchwood, and that's how that came about.
Mark Cherry is just brilliant. He also wrote Devious Maids. I don't know whether you ever watched that. I love Devious Maids. My God, I cried when they canned that after 3 seasons or whatever it was, or 4 seasons. I just loved that show. But back to you. I mean, you've done everything. Celebrity Juice, I'm a Celebrity, never mind the Buzzcocks. I mean, you name it, you have done it. But you've also, I think, represented beautifully in your life as well. And when you were Stonewall's Entertainer of the Year back in 2006. Again, finger snaps for that. You have worked tirelessly with Stonewall on their Education for All campaign against homophobia back in the day. You have always been, once you were out, John, you were there to represent and to show good and education and to just show the world that injustices shouldn't be there. It's been very important for you to represent.
Yes, and solely because I had no representation when I was younger of looking to see somebody like myself. And because of the certain things I've done and the roles I've played, I've had a lot of young people who come up to me and say, you're the reason I know who I am, because I've watched you and you've spoken openly about who you are and your life and your husband and your family. I am a firm believer I've said this, and you can look back on quotes and when I've said it and how many times I've said it. I've always said, if I was ever put in a position where doing what I'm doing and you don't have a voice, I will be your voice. I will speak up for you. I will try to get things changed. I will try to make things better. I will be the voice that stands up and pushes for you if you don't have one. And I've always stood by that. And even to the point where, and I've taken flack for it, that I am not a conservative, but I have gone to meet with conservative prime ministers, as I have with Labour prime ministers. I've done things with them going back to John Major, because I feel that if you are there representing, even though at the times when they are not accepting of certain things that need to be represented, you might be able to change someone's mind being in that room. And Scott and I were one of the big things that I'm absolutely proud of, apart from a lot of other things, was when we were invited to go to sit with David Cameron to discuss. They wanted to discuss how they could open up a bit more to get more LGBTQ plus people involved in their politics. And we went, having not voted for them. I was asked to go, so I thought, I have a voice, I'll go use it. And it was one of the things that we discussed around that big table in number 10 was gay marriage. And they said, I said, pass it, just pass it. If you want to change things, pass gay marriage. And I'm paraphrasing a lot here. But then a couple of weeks later, he's on television. What does he do? He passes gay marriage. And a lot of people won't remember that it was, again, I'm not a conservative, but they passed gay marriage. And if you're not in the room with people, if you're not representing, if you don't take the risk and step out of the comfort zone, you may not make change. And that's what I've always believed.
It's so true. I mean, this is why your voice, I feel, is so important within this industry, which obviously brings me on to the fact that your voice is not heard as much now as it should be, because you're not on the TV so much now because of certain misconduct allegations. I could sit here and say, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. I'd like to hear your side of the story. I'd like to hear how it was for you, because I just think it's sad that you're not seen as much as you used to be, because you're a brilliant entertainer and a brilliant representative for our queer community.
Thank you for saying that. First off, it makes me sad because I know I have done a lot. It makes me sad because a lot of people who have attacked me are the people that I fought for to allow them to have a voice. And again, you can disagree with me and you can say what you like about me now, but it was May 3rd that my world, it was May 3rd, 2021 that my world shattered and everything changed for me. I told all these stories, everything prior, written about them, all of that stuff that came out and was being said. It was exceptionally hurtful. The most disappointed that I'm not saying that I didn't do any of the gag things and, when I was doing nude scenes, shake my bits about and do all sorts of stuff like that. But there were, according to the knowledge and the things that I was told, there were no complaints. They were exaggerate. It was because of an exaggerated story that was printed that somebody talked about, certain allegations were made against them. I firmly believe that the way that the press ran with it and certain people ran with it and certain red tops ran with it was a veiled homophobic attack. They could not get me any other way, but, let's get him because we've heard stories that he flashed and did certain stupid things on set. Now, the thing that upsets me the most is they tried to make it out that I was a sexual predator, that I was they actually wanted at one point to print something saying I was a pedophile, which my lawyers were like, you do that and you're done, because there is nothing like that. And for about 2 years, this went on. And the thing that I'm just going to be blunt about it. I contemplated taking my own life a couple of times. I knew that one day when I'd hit rock bottom, my husband Scott came home and I was smacking my head on the kitchen countertop because of things that got too much for me. I didn't see a way out from it. Everything that I loved had been stripped away from me. I remember, and I'm sorry, I don't think any less of him for this, but I remember Russell calling me the day it was about to hit the press, and he said, they want quotes from Julie Gardner and I. And I said, well, give them quotes. You were there. You know that nothing untoward was happening. I said, for goodness sake, he said, but I need to go call the other person because we're worried about him, that he might do something silly. And I hung the phone up there and I went, what about me? I'm most disappointed the way my colleagues in the industry didn't speak up, did not step forward and say, this is ridiculous. This is stupid. This was listen, I'd never do it again, ever. We learned from what's happened, but it became almost like, and people then started talking about it online, which I think is a cesspool, Twitter and all that. People started talking about it online, people commenting on stuff and saying things that were not there, did not know anything about it, and didn't know what the context was. I was the beefcake for Doctor Who. I was not asked about doing nude scenes or taking my clothes off in original contracts. It was written. So therefore, if you want to talk about a power dynamic, I thought if I didn't do the stuff, I would lose my job if you don't do what's written in the script. And as an actor, that's what I do written in the script. However, I made myself feel comfortable, however wrong you think it was. At that time, I was making myself feel comfortable in the situations that I was standing naked or doing whatever. And yes, offset amongst my co-workers and colleagues who, again, did not complain. We were doing silly, stupid things. And to be honest with you, I wasn't the only person doing silly, dumb things. I was just the one who was most upfront and thought it was funny when I talked about it at conventions and panels, and the audience would roar with laughter and cheer, and they would all want more stories. Oh, I was the one who would tell all the silly stories and all the silly stuff that happened. But then it was twisted and turned and backfired on me. I'm sorry to sound it because it's hard to talk about, because it upsets me, and I get upset and still a little bit depressed when I sit and think about and hear about all this stuff that people saying about certain things in our community and da-da-da. And I'm like, I could help, I could do stuff, but nobody wants to touch me. Well, even to the extent, I'm sorry, Nigel, and I just getting something off my chest a little bit. Even to the extent, I'm not saying that it's the people that I worked with, the actors, but their teams who, when I go to conventions now, they don't want me in photo ops with them. They don't want me at signings with them. They don't want me being there included. And I know, because my agent at the time, who also has let me go, we've parted ways. I was badly advised in the very beginning. I should have fought. But I was told to not say anything because it was going through the whole Me Too thing. Don't say anything, apologize, do this. And I'm like, I've already apologized for silly behavior 15 years ago. Why do I have to keep apologizing? And I know that there was an email sent out because somebody contacted us from the world of Doctor Who and said, we've been told, again, I was told, we've been told that if we don't drop you or stop using you for stuff, we will lose our licensing rights from the BBC.
Wow.
And I was the biggest champion for the show, for one of the biggest champions of the show. And it hurts. It hurts. I'm not asking for sympathy from anybody. I don't want people's sympathy. I'm just telling you my side, because I have moved on. I've gone to therapy. I've been on the depression that it took me into, to the dark place. I had to go on medication to get out of it. All of that kind of stuff I have done. I've been there. I don't want, you can say again, you can be nasty about me online. Go ahead. Do it. You can say what you like, but I just want to be heard.
You know your truth. And first off, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. For me personally, it just seems a shame that these allegations in some people's mind outweigh all of the joy, all of the entertainment, all of the smiles that you have brought and continue to bring to so many people around the world with your talent and your craftsmanship. I will say though, it's like you recently did a tour in the UK, the Laid Bare tour, and your fan base has not deserted you. It's like your fan base still very much love you. That must have been, after all of those feelings of depression and those feelings of potentially not wanting to be here anymore and self-harm, that must have been a moment of, actually, do you know what? There is still some goodness in the world, because people are still wanting to pay their money, put their bums on seats and watch you do what you do so brilliantly well on stage.
Sorry, and sorry. I have to say that going out on the road was the biggest. It was a scary thing, but it was also the biggest thing for me that I had to do, and I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't have a young man in my life who was somebody that I championed when I was a judge on the TV show Any Dream Will Do, where we were looking for a Joseph. And Scott and I often comment, we don't have kids, and we often comment that he's more like our son than anything. And Keith Jack, he was doing a show with he was getting into production, and I've kind of mentored him over the years. We've never not been in touch, and I've known him since he was 19. And he came to me and he said, I have a company who wants to put you back on the road, because all of the companies that I was working with, everything I was doing was canceled. Done. Literally within 48 pantos, big show, big tour, everything works, albums done, right? And he came to me 2 years after it, having still been in touch, being a great friend. And he said, I want to get you back out on the road. Would you want to produce the show yourself with me and Matt Brinkler? And we'll put you out on the road. And I said, if I do, I want to do smaller venues, because one of the ways to get back out there is to get the audience, get back out, see them, go to communities, tell your story. And I said, I want to tell the story in the show. So I had a whole section of the show where I how I do it, which is to put it to music and to tell my story through song and story, right? And that's what we did. Laid Bare, I laid it all on the line on that show. And the audience came to see it. The audiences loved it. My audience, when I go to even going to conventions while I was there doing the show, the crowds were amazing. My fan base has never turned their back on me. Laid Bare was so successful. I am now writing and working on a Christmas show, John Barrowman Campus Christmas, which we're going to do.
The best name ever.
Absolutely. And we're going to have a fabulous time. And I'm going to integrate. For so long, with the 2 years that happened, what it started to make me doubt myself. It started to make me think that I wasn't liked. It started to make me not have the confidence that I had. And I had to go back out on the road to feel that audience, to be with them, to, also to perform again. And I did. So the Christmas show that's coming up, it's literally they've come to me and they've said, the theaters came and said, we want you to do a Christmas show for us. And I said, fabulous, I'll do it. I'm going to do it my own way because everybody said, you can't tell stories like you used to. You can't do that. You know what? I'm not changing who I am. I'm not going to change who I am because of some stupid section of people who are, what makes them think that they are so entitled, that they are entitled to use something that is in the past, they're twisting to ruin someone's life and career and joy. You know what? I'm not going to let it happen. You can have your own agenda, but I know what happened. My colleagues know what happened, and I've talked about it now. So we're moving on.
Well, I was going to say, doing it your way is the perfect way of living your authentic life, quite frankly. It sounds like you feel like you're coming out the other side then.
Yeah, I think I am. It may never be back to what it was, right? But that's their loss. It's not mine. That's their loss. Because I have joy in my life. I have a husband. I have a fan base. I have people who want to work with me. I have a voice, and I still will speak up. Even if you don't want to hear it, I will speak up, and I will still be that voice for those who may not have the bigger voice, particularly in this time that we're all going through. And it's, people say it's just, America going through it. It's going to hit the UK. I'm telling you that right now.
I think it already has, John, to be honest.
It's not happening. And you're going to have to, people, rather than standing and just screaming at people going, that doesn't work. No, you need to have conversations with people. You need to have disagreements with them. We need to understand how they function in order to fight back.
Holler to that, Mr. Barrowman. And also, if people do want tickets for your fabulous campus Christmas, johnbarrowman.com is the place for tickets, let it be said. John, you have been the most perfect guest. So let's end the podcast with some fabulous quick-fire questions and a bit of fun, quite frankly. John Barrowman, what gets you on the dance floor? What record would get you on that dance floor? What song?
The song that gets me on the dance floor, I have sung it myself on a concert tour. Anytime I hear it, it takes me back to when I was in high school. One of the girls that I dated, Paige Tucker, her nickname, I called her Peani Taku. We were driving home one night, and let's just say we lost control of the car, and we were singing to this song, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Baby Give It Up. And we hit into what we thought was a puddle, but it pulled us into a field that had been turned into a lake because of flooding. And her dad's Chrysler big luxury car we called it the U-boat from then on, was sinking in the water. So that song brings back memories from high school, but also any time around the house I play it, I'm up and dancing. And it's the disco era. It's a time that when I was a kid, we used to put on roller skates, and our parents would drop us off at the roller derby or the roller rink, and they'd leave us on a Friday night for 4 hours to roller skate with $5 to get a hot dog and some soda. And we'd roller skate with all the other kids. And then God knows how we got home and what our parents who drove us home, but we'd get back home. So that song has a vast amount of memories for me in it.
That's brilliant, and it is a tune, let it be said. Bit of DISCO, always good. You get told a dinner party for 5 fabulous guests. They can be LGBTQIA or otherwise. They can be dead or alive. They can be cartoon. Just make them famous so we know who they are. John Barrowman, who's coming to dinner?
Who is coming to dinner? This is, okay, I would have to first off say Cole Porter, because Cole Porter has played such a huge part of my career since 1989, when I first got my first job in Anything Goes with Elaine Page, and then continuing to do things like I did a Cole Porter album with Cole Porter songs that I just did because I love the music. I think he's one of the most brilliant lyricists, quirky, fun, of his time, and without, with the word, he was gay, but not in a way that we call gay now. He was gay also. I played his lover in a movie, but the joy that he brings me in singing, the album that I released went to number, it was like in the top 5 in the jazz charts in America. I didn't know, had no clue. So Cole Porter, I'd love to sit and just have a conversation about the naughty lyrics that he wrote. To all of the songs that he wrote, there was an alternate version of naughty lyrics, and you can get them, and they're available. And I remember even when I was doing Anything Goes with Elaine Page, there was a couple of times, I think on her last matinee, I sang, "But if baby, I'm on bottom, you're on top," rather than the right lyrics, which brought a smile to her face. She also said, "Don't do that again." But anyway, so Cole Porter would be one of them. My second one would be Gene Kelly. And I did get to meet Gene Kelly when I worked for David Guest at one point and in Los Angeles. And I was invited to a function where I was there with Frank Sinatra, Shirley Bassey, just to name a few. And Gene Kelly, all the old Hollywood people were there. Gene Kelly was at a table, and I got to go up and talk to him because Gene Kelly, and he was going to direct they wanted me to do a show called Red, Red Rose that he was going to direct, but unfortunately he passed away. So that never happened, but I got to meet him. Gene Kelly was the musical person that I watched and kind of molded myself after. He was the one that I would see sitting watching the afternoon matinees with my gran and watching them. Gene Kelly came on, I was glued. And to this day, I love watching him work, sing, dance, and do what he did, particularly in Singing in the Rain. One of the best, if you want to get yourself into movie musicals, start with Singing in the Rain. And Gene Kelly, I just to sit and pick his brain, how he went from being on Broadway to being in movies to then directing in the latter part of his life, things like Xanadu and with Olivia Newton-John and all, so Gene Kelly. That's 2. My third is, and I'm looking at him right now because it's an artist, Keith Haring.
Oh, fabulous.
And can I show you? Because it's...
Please do. I adore Keith Haring. Keith Haring is literally, one of my favorite things in life.
Keith Haring, I'd have to dinner because when we first bought our first place in West Hollywood, there used to be Keith Haring statues all up Santa Monica Boulevard. And I was introduced to Keith Haring very early on when I was in the 80s and 90s because I just loved his artwork and also what he stood for. He was a bit of a rebel, a bit of a radical. So he was outspoken, but he was outspoken in a way, not just living his authentic self as a person. He was living his authentic self through his artwork, right? And he started out as a graffiti artist. When I was able to afford it, because I always said I wanted...
Wow.
Signed.
That's incredible. Do you know what? I'm sat here in my Keith Haring slippers, which I like, but I can't compare, can I really? Do you know what I mean?
I've got 2 other, as time has gone on, I have 2 other Haring pieces that are, and one of them is, I call it his superhero. It's the one of he's the winged man, and it's my rendition of the superhero. So I would have him at the dinner table because not only am I'm a huge fan, but I am a collector of his. I've got a soccer ball that has all of his artwork on it too, because my brother was a big soccer player. Anyway, so Keith Haring would be there just because of what he represents to me as a part of the queer community. And when I was growing up as a young gay man, discovering myself, I also discovered part of myself through his art and his activism. My fourth would be an author, S.E. Hinton, who wrote the book The Outsiders, and that was one of the first books that and when I wrote my autobiography, I kind of paralleled one of the characters in it and wrote about, in things that I experienced that Ponyboy also experienced, who was one of the characters in The Outsiders. But I read that when I was in going into high school, and it's about two different groups of people from different sides of the tracks who have a connection through certain characters in it, which was very much like my life growing up. I was part of many tribes, but I was the glue between all the tribes that kept us all together. And I've been a huge fan of her writing for a long time. I have all of her books and my little section here in the library. But little did I know that she was going to become a fan later in life. And we contact each other on social media. And I sent her my books that I wrote with my sister. And she then she doesn't sign things very often. She then took all my books of hers, signed them, sent them back to me. And she's much older now, so she doesn't travel very much. But I went to see the musical The Outsiders. She asked my opinion on it, and I was too embarrassed and shocked to even say anything. But I would love to have her to dinner just to talk to her, to just know, because a lot of people have their version of how they perceive the characters in her novels. And she's very adamant about, and she says, you can say what you like about them, but the character themselves, Ponyboy, they were not gay. But if you connect to something like that, like I did, that's your interpretation, and there's nothing wrong with it. I'd love to just sit and talk to her, but I think she's a wonderful person. And if you don't follow her online, follow her. My last person, would be my grand butler, who watched the movie musicals with me when I was a kid, and who was also one of my biggest supporters when I was young. And she came to Opryland my first time around, and she sat in her wheelchair and she watched me perform. She got to see me do stuff, but I would love to sit with her. I'm so sorry, Nigel.
Don't apologize. I'm honored that you are showing that emotion. That shows a beauty, John, an absolute beauty.
I'd love to, because my mom and dad are still with me. My dad's 92, my mom's 90. Scott and I, it's my mom's mother. Scott and I I watched my mom and dad look after my grand when we came to the States. And my mom and dad live with us now. We've created an apartment for them in our house. Anyway, I'd love to sit with my grand and just take her through everything that I've done, because the one thing that amazes me the most is and this is one thing I'm very proud of, and I know a lot of people don't agree with it, but when I got my MBE, would a woman who worked in a dry cleaner and had me go pick up her Benson and Hedges, whose husband worked for the council, would they ever have believed that their grandson would have been at Buckingham Palace receiving an honor with his husband and his mom and dad at their side? Just those things, just to experience them with her, to let her see them. To see her reaction.
Do you know what, John Barrowman? There is no more beautiful way to end this podcast. And I will say right now that she will be looking down on you and be very proud of everything that you have done in your life. And do you know what? In a world where hopefully she can hear this podcast with all of the things that you have shared today, I am sure she is as proud of you as many people listening are, quite frankly. The way
you would have loved to gaze.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that you have dealt with things, I've got to say, is incredible. It is good to see that you are still, live and kicking, to use that pun, if I may. And I wish you all the best with everything coming your way. Thank you so much for sharing today. It's been an absolute joy. And John Barrowman, thank you for proving that your life has been a gay old time.
Woohoo!